Hello, my name is Bo Birch, and welcome to today's Human Capital Matters series. Human Capital Matters was born in the very early stages of this pandemic to bring business leaders around the United States to an interactive conversation focusing on developing and communicating the business continuity plan. I'd like to thank each of you for joining us. Please send your questions and comments you'd like to share with our speaker today through the chat portal. Our firm, Human Capital Solutions, also has a dedicated email listed on the flyer, which is working remotely at humancs.com. Be sure to follow us on our LinkedIn page, Human Capital Solutions, for updates on our next Human Capital Matters segment that is scheduled for October the 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are delighted to welcome our special guest speaker today, Mr. Chris Chung. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Bo. Good to be with you.
Chris and I go way back, I think, when he first started the role. In 2015, Chris joined the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina as Chief Executive Officer, bringing more than 23 years of state-level economic development experience to the role. Chris will tell us more about his organization in our conversation in a bit. Chris previously held various executive management responsibilities at the Missouri Partnership and Ohio Department of Development, now known as Jobs Ohio. Chris attended Ohio State University with a double major in Japanese and economics, completed coursework towards his master's in public policy and management. Chris resides in Raleigh with his wife Emily and their daughter Elizabeth. Again, what a pleasure it is to have you with us, Chris. We'll get into our first question. Chris, please tell us a bit about the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. It is now, about 5 years of age, and what is your mission, sir?
Great, thanks, Bo, and again, greetings. Greetings from rainy Raleigh this afternoon. So our organization, it's actually about 6 years old now. We opened our doors back in October of 2014, but the 60 some odd folks who make up our team here at the EDPNC, we get up every day with the mission of trying to improve the economic well-being and quality of life for the people who call North Carolina home. It doesn't matter if you're a lifelong resident of North Carolina or you're someone like me who just moved here a matter of years ago. There are now 10.5 million people who live in this state. And so if we're doing our job well in terms of economic development for North Carolina, at the end of the day, hopefully the economic quality of life for the citizens of this state is a little bit better than at the beginning of the day when we started at work. The actual functions that we do, to get more specific, economic development encompasses a lot of different ways, especially in a diverse economy like North Carolina has. But our work really focuses on us on a few different areas. One is efforts to recruit new employers and businesses from outside the state that can hopefully set up operations here. Of course, we also never want to forget about the many companies who already call North Carolina home and supporting the growth needs of many of those companies, especially in our manufacturing sector. We do work in the international trade arena, which is essentially assisting companies with growing their export sales overseas, oftentimes small and medium-sized firms. We even get into small business startup counseling. So if you're an entrepreneur or would-be entrepreneur, you want to launch a new business entity in North Carolina, we've got a team that helps individuals walk through those first few steps of getting that done here in the state. And last but not least is our work around tourism promotion, which is basically designed to boost leisure travel and to get visitors coming in from outside the state to spend their vacations here, hopefully spend their money in North Carolina and support that very large tourism economy that North Carolina has.
Great. It's really great to hear you give that mission that many of us maybe are not aware of from the day-to-day basis. Chris, are some results perhaps you want to convey, some things you're really proud of? I know you don't like to mention specific projects, but tell us about some results that you're pleased over these last almost 6 years.
Yeah, sure. So first thing I'll always mention is even though an organization like ours being fairly high profile, we will get we consider ourselves lucky that we'll be credited with some of these results. But the reality is everything that we do as an organization, we are just 60 some odd people. And we rely on a network of partners at the state level, the regional level, the local level, the private sector to do our work. Again, whether that's effectively marketing North Carolina as a tourism destination, whether that's successfully convincing a company to relocate here from somewhere else, all of that is predicated on a strong team effort involving a lot of different people who plug in at different points in that conversation. So while we're the lucky ones who get to talk about these stats, in reality, we can't do our jobs at the state level without that network of partners all across the state. All that said, we're really honored to be part of nearly 700 corporate expansion and recruitment announcements over the past 6 years. And together, cumulatively, that's something in the neighborhood of 101,000 announced new jobs and close to $23 billion in announced new capital investment. That's everything from small 10-person expansions in our very rural communities all the way up to projects that announced in some of our larger metro areas that are thousands of new employees. All of those are important because all of those, like I said earlier, all of those contribute to the economic well-being of this state. You look at tourism. While tourism has certainly had a tough year this year because of the pandemic, you look at 17, 18, 19, those were each 3 consecutive years of visitor spending resulting from efforts to get more tourism here in North Carolina. So $27 billion last year in visitor spending that supported 220,000 people who work in our leisure and hospitality sector in North Carolina. I think our team, our tourism group is really proud of having played some role in that. Like I said, those are the big numbers. You could go down to the individual examples of the entrepreneurs that we've helped stand up their business and realize their lifelong dream of starting business. You could look at the companies that we've helped introduce to new customers in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, who have grown their sales overseas. You know, that's hugely important because those companies can now take that revenue and invest in growing their footprint here in North Carolina. All of these would be what we consider to be successes, be they large or small or anything in between. But as I said, really for us, we're thankful that we get to lock arms every day with the network of partners all across North Carolina to deliver these kinds of results.
You're a great collaborator, and spreading the appreciation around is wonderful in our current economy we're in. Chris, thank you for that. How did the pandemic initially impact your ability, Chris, to effectively execute on your mission?
Yeah, so I mean, you could answer that on a couple of levels. Obviously, if you go back to March, it feels like a lot longer ago than 6.5 months, but if you can all kind of join me in reminiscing back to that time, a lot of us just had no idea how long this would drag out. I think most people probably would have thought, okay, it's going to be a couple months. Maybe things will be okay after that. Maybe even some people were so optimistic to think in a few weeks we can snap back to normal. I think those who probably looked more at the science and the medical data that was available at the time probably realized it could likely be a longer haul. But either way, we knew that it would have at least an immediate effect on our activity across multiple levels. One, you look at travel and tourism. Well, very quickly, people stopped traveling altogether, be it business travel, be it leisure travel. When you have a pandemic with a highly infectious disease, people don't want to get on a plane. They don't want to stay at a hotel. They're going to curb that travel right away if it's personal. And if they're doing travel for work, good chance that their company probably suspended all travel pretty quickly into this. So that, of course, is going to affect our performance relative to metrics like visitor spending that result from tourism. You look at the business recruitment or business expansion activity that we're involved in on a routine basis. For many companies, as soon as the pandemic came on in March, they had to quickly determine whether or not their industries would be affected, and if so, by how much, and then how would that actually affect their growth plans? Do they still need a new factory? Do they still need to expand their headcount? All of those things, of course, are going to affect their intentions of moving forward, and that affects the very pipeline of deals that we work on. You know, we set goals at the beginning of every year, working with our board of directors, and we, like many groups, we take a look at the 3-year average from the 3 most recent years. And like I said, not only in areas like tourism, but also areas like business recruitment, we've had a really strong run of years leading up to 2020. So that meant we had a very aggressive goal across the board for this year, be it business recruitment, be it expansion, be it exports. And so right away, with something like a pandemic, you know that's going to affect your ability to meet those goals that you've set for yourself, simply because this is such a huge, unprecedented economic headwind. On a more personal level, of course, I think anyone who's guiding any organization, big or small, has to figure out how do you keep everybody focused and engaged in their mission when this just massive disruption is happening to the world around us. And this is not just an economic disruption, right? This pandemic has a very human element to it. People getting sick, people dying, people being worried that they'll catch it or spread it to people that they care about. That's a lot for people to psychologically and emotionally process. And in the middle of that, how do you keep people focused on the work that they're tasked with? That's never easy. I don't think any of us have had to go through an organizational continuity test like that. I think the way I tried to approach it, and hopefully still approach it right now, is I think I posted something to LinkedIn, back in March. I wish I would have posted it again and again, just as a constant reminder to everybody. But it's that old parable about the boy walking along the coast and picking up, a bunch of starfish are washed up on the shore. He picks one up, throws it back in the water, picks another one, throws it back in the water. And kind of an old man comes along and says, "What are you doing? You're not going to make any difference. Look how many starfish there are here on the coast." And the little boy picks one up and throws it in the ocean and said, "Well, sure makes a difference for that one." And I think that's the kind of mindset, especially in a public service work like economic development. You just have to stay focused to know that any incremental impact we can have in our work, if it's helping support an individual or helping that individual to support his or her family because they're in a better economic situation, that is a goal we all need to strive for. Even if at times we don't feel like it's making that big of a difference, we have to trust that it will make a difference on an individual level. And in something like this pandemic situation, that is absolutely key to staying focused on mission.
Amazing the way you state that. With holistically, it's sort of a war on so many fronts that we're facing, economically, mentally, emotionally, as well. And so now that we're about 6 months into the pandemic, how successful do you think you've been, you and the team, in adjusting and executing on your mission, Chris?
So I think, again, that's going to depend. You look at you take it at a high level, you can look at our numbers. And in spite of setting really aggressive goals across all these different functions that we're responsible for, in spite of those aggressive goals at the beginning of 2020, and in spite of the unprecedented nature of this headwind, in some metrics, we're actually ahead of where we should be at this point in our year. You take something like capital investment. That's an important metric for us when it comes to business recruitment and corporate expansion projects. We're actually about 20% over where we should be at this particular point in the year. And again, that's something to be really proud of. Part of that's a unique reflection of the types of deals that we have successfully worked on this year. In other metrics, we're about at where we would like to be at this year, again, in spite of some of these unique challenges to 2020. And candidly, of course, in some areas, we are still behind. We have closed the gap considerably since March. But you look at metrics like job announcements and the number of recruitment and expansion wins that we have worked in some of the more economically distressed counties around North Carolina, we're still at about 20% off of where we would like to be at this point in the year. But had you told me 6 months ago that half a year into this pandemic, we would only be 20% off of the aggressive target we'd set at the beginning of the year, I think I would have been thrilled to hear that. And so now our job is to stay focused. We've got 3.5 months left to go in 2020. The more we can close the gap on those goals, again, every little bit makes a difference relative to that mission that we're tasked with.
Yeah, congratulations. With all said, to be at 80% of where you thought you would be is quite incredible. So what impact have you seen, Chris, to your prospective, you talk about pipeline, your prospective and your established business clients, knowing that there are all types of sectors perhaps that are prospective clients, your established clients have diversity with business sectors, but as a general rule, what have you seen the impact for your prospects and your clients?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with one of those areas that doesn't get enough attention in terms of our work, and that's the work we do to support the growth needs of existing employers in North Carolina. We know that things like recruiting a new employer here, that gets a lot of attention, a lot of publicity. It's important, no doubt. It's why we're tasked with doing it, but it's frankly more important to be tending to the needs of the companies that are already here. Again, we don't have to woo them on why North Carolina is great. They know that. That's why they're here. What we have to do is remove any barriers that they have to keep growing in North Carolina. So, like I said, that function doesn't get enough attention in normal times, but I think during this pandemic, it's especially shown a light on the need to take care of our existing employers. And I think what we have seen from our work with existing manufacturers around the state is tremendous resilience. Again, these are companies that back in March first had to navigate the uncertainty of what would be considered an essential or non-essential business. And many of these employers weren't even sure if they could tell their employees to show up to work because they didn't know if those employees might get pulled over for being essentially out of the house as non-essential business workers. And so they've had to navigate areas like that. They've had to navigate all the stress on global supply chains that happens when you have a global pandemic. We've seen resiliency from companies like Brightview in Durham or Kitsbo, which is a cycling apparel manufacturer that relocated from the Bay Area of California to Western North Carolina a year and a half ago. They make high-end apparel for people who are into cycling. They made a very quick pivot this spring. Sorry about that. They made a very quick pivot this spring into manufacturing personal protective equipment, face shields, and protective face coverings. Just seeing the innovation, creativity, and resiliency of these existing manufacturers that we've worked with, that's just one story of what we've seen from clientele. You look at what business recruitment clients are looking at, the kinds of companies that we're trying to convince to locate here. Of course, they're now reassessing what sort of presence they need to have. Take office projects, for example, software companies, headquarters. Are they going to rely as much on a physical office space? And if so, are they going to gravitate towards a downtown urban center? Or now they're going to look in a suburb because it's a little bit more spread out, a little bit more spacious, things that have proven to be of value during this pandemic. You look at our tourism audience, again, trying to convince people to come visit North Carolina is really challenging when people have legitimate concerns about their health and the health of their loved ones if they venture outside the home. And so what that's meant is a lot of careful research on what matters to people who are getting ready to travel or beginning to think about it, and what sort of messaging will resonate most with them to assure them that if they come visit North Carolina, it's a safe experience for them. Safety is first and foremost in the minds of travelers now. And that was not the case, of course, 6.5 months ago. So again, depending on where you're talking about in our operation, different audiences have responded in different ways to this pandemic. Our job, of course, is to adjust our strategies as much as possible.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. Since none of us were around during the last pandemic in 1918, as you look back now over the last 6 months, what would be one takeaway, perhaps, that you'd like to share regarding a key learning, something that really bubbles up, that was something that you learned, maybe a leadership opportunity that you'd like to share, something that perhaps worked, if you will?
Yeah, I think for us, we actually just had our quarterly all hands virtual meeting today with our 60 staff, and we were talking a little bit about longer term. What is our workplace going to look like? We've all had this unexpected experiment in remote working these past 6 months, like many organizations have, obviously. But I think the lesson that we have learned really quickly here is to trust our people, right? I mean, I think many folks would never have thought that they would have all of their employees working remotely before the pandemic. And I think we've all quickly learned that while it has its warts, it has been by and large as effective, if not more effective, for the vast majority of, at least of the work that we do within our organization. Now, there are still going to be opportunities where we have to sit down face to face with clients and whatnot. And of course, not having some of that in-person organic relationship development and collaboration. Yes, those are some of the trade-offs, but by and large, in terms of getting the work, accomplishing the results, I think had we known this 6 months ago, I think most of us a long time ago would have allowed a system where at least folks were able to work remotely some part of the time. Again, you want to have enough time together to generate some of those organic, spontaneous, serendipitous collaborations and conversations. But in terms of a sacrifice to productivity, I just don't know that we have seen that in our work. And I think a lot of that was just being put in a position where we are essentially forced to trust that our people working separate of a physical office can get the job done. And at least for us, that's proven really well. So I think trusting our people, and I think also we have to earn their trust. At some point, we will want people coming back to the office at least part of the time. And I think for our employees to feel comfortable doing that, they have to trust that we are doing that with their safety and their well-being in mind. So I think it really comes down to that two-way street of trust between employers and their workforce. That's been probably one of the biggest learnings for me personally over these past 6 months.
Chris, that's quite encouraging, and we are hearing that as a trend on human capital matters with CEOs like yourself speaking. Thank you. So the other side of that coin perhaps would be, Chris, what would be one thing you and the executive team perhaps may do differently if we have another similar disruptive event?
Let us hope not. No, certainly nothing like that. Yeah. Again, I really hope we don't see anything nearly this disruptive again in our lifetimes. It'd be hard to imagine what that could be after these past 6 months. I think, look, how I answer this organization question would be very different than maybe a company that manufactures products or something like that. We don't have physical inventory. We don't have a supply chain that we depend on. The work that we produce is as a result of the people who work for the organization. It's ultimately for us, that is our raw materials, are the people who are a part of the EDPNC team. And so I think for us, the thing, at least for me personally, I think something I would have liked to be able to do from the get-go, but maybe didn't realize the importance of until we were a little bit further into this pandemic, was just the simple act of checking in and seeing how people are doing. Again, whether that's employees, whether that's clients, whether they're some of our partner organizations, I think just that very simple act of reaching out and seeing how people are holding up. Again, this is so unprecedented that so many people have been displaced from their normal daily routines. They're not working at the office. They don't have the benefit of camaraderie with their colleagues. Some of them have children to take care of at home or children to make sure get an adequate virtual education. It's a tremendous toll emotionally, psychologically, and mentally on a lot of people. And I think even if it's some simple act of checking in on colleagues, employees, just to see how they're holding up through all this, I think that's something. I don't think any of us knew how long this would be going on for back in March. Like I said, I think most folks thought maybe a couple of months at most. Very few people probably would have thought 6 months and longer. It will probably be another 12 months till we can really start to see the light at the end of the tunnel with a vaccine and things like that. That's a long period of time to endure these conditions, and not everyone is going to respond to that in the same way. And so taking a couple extra minutes at the beginning or end of every conversation, or even reaching out just to have that conversation, I think that's something I wish I would have known to do at the beginning of this. But then again, I'm not sure I would have known it would be going on this long. My board chair is always great about this. Every conversation we have, he either starts or he ends it by just taking some time to say, Chris, how are you holding up? How's your family holding up? And that means a lot. And I think I would have done that a lot sooner. The nice thing is we know we'll still be in this posture for quite some time. And so there's plenty of time to make amends and continue reaching out in that way.
That's an excellent key learning, that human beings are going through a grieving process. There's been a real shock to us all. And to get to acceptance, it's great when our leaders check in to authentically ask, how are you holding up? How are you doing? Thank you for that. We'll go to our chat room. We have a few minutes. We have about 6 minutes left. There is a question that comes. How do you see the appeal of Southeastern North Carolina to manufacturing clients and particularly the Wilmington metro area. Any specific activities? Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if you look at some of the sectors, and this probably has a lot more to do with our business expansion and recruitment work. When you look at some of the sectors that have been busiest for us in the past 6 months, certainly logistics, e-commerce fulfillment, operations like that have been big. Food and beverage have also been big. Again, that should be no surprise to anyone when you look at how consumption habits have evolved in these 6 months of people mostly, spending more time at home than they ever have in a long while. And so I think somewhere like Southeast North Carolina, especially anchored by a port city like Wilmington, there are some great opportunities there, be it around, again, distribution and fulfillment, be it the fact that Southeast North Carolina produces so much in terms of livestock and crops. How can some of that value be converted into processed food or finished food products? I think those are some opportunities from an economic development standpoint for that region. You hear a lot about the need for cold storage capacity right now, especially as a vaccine eventually comes to market. If you're talking about inoculating 330 million Americans, the vaccines have to be kept at a certain temperature, right? And so right now, one of the concerns, if you look at distribution of a vaccine, is where do we have enough places to store this effectively until it can be deployed as a vaccine to people? And that oftentimes, I believe, if I'm reading things correctly, depends on adequate cold storage capacity. So you look at somewhere like Wilmington that's invested in cold storage facilities right there by the port. And I think that was more prescient even than it was at the time that they developed that. So I think there's good opportunities. Again, you look at the sectors we've seen activity, and I think those line up pretty well with what Southeastern North Carolina's value proposition is.
Great. We've got a couple of minutes. Maybe one more question that's in. Chris, tell us perhaps your experience these last few months. Have they changed or maybe even strengthened the mission and the purpose of economic development for North Carolina?
I think the purpose is always an important one. Again, as I said, I hope every one of our 60 people gets up every day remembering that mission that we have to improve the economic well-being of our neighbors here in North Carolina. That mission, I don't think, is ever less important. There may be times when it's more relevant. I think in a good economy, it's a little easier to lose sight of the importance of that, but we have certainly been suffering some economic headwinds and tolls these past 6 months, especially when you look at sectors like travel, tourism, leisure, and hospitality. I think anything we can do to accelerate the recovery that North Carolina is going to have, anything that we can do in our power and in our work to make the economic prospects for someone in North Carolina better today than they were yesterday, I think that is especially important right now. But yeah, I don't think it has changed fundamentally the mission or the importance of the mission. Perhaps it puts it into a little bit higher relief than maybe sometimes people take it for granted as, especially, we're coming off of what was a really strong economy and very quickly have gotten into something quite different. And I think that's just highlighted the importance that not just groups like ours, but local chambers, local economic development groups all over the state are playing a genuine role in helping with that eventual recovery.
Thank you, Chris. I just participated in a North Carolina survey where we're finding certainly logistics and distribution jobs up in Garner. We see the new Amazon center that's being built. So we do have a transition of skill sets today where perhaps individuals who've been in hospitality, who've been in retail, maybe those jobs aren't as robust as they once were. And then the high demand for logistics, distribution, et cetera. So I had a conversation this morning with the CEO, kind of two buckets: STEM jobs and people that can sell and promote product and service. So we've got an interesting few years ahead of us with, I think we had 22 million original Americans come out of the downsizing. There's about 11 million on the sidelines looking for the new job opportunities across the country. Thank you for being with us. We really enjoyed having you, Chris.
Thank you, Bo. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and to our audience, thank you for joining us again, October the 15th at 2 p.m. Try to tune in for our next segment of Human Capital Matters. And appreciate all the support staff that you do to make this event happen. Again, have a great evening and be safe and stay well.